Hello and welcome back to the Karma Stories podcast. I'm Rob and I hope you are having a wonderful day today. Today I have 3 stories for you from the Malicious Compliance subreddit. Make sure to give us a follow on your preferred podcasting platform, and if you're on YouTube, subscribe and drop a like on the video, and my buddy Carmen here might just offer you one of his cookies. Alright, on to today's stories, let's jump right in. This story comes to us from Consistent Shoe 9602. Boss yells at me for following instructions and tells me to do the opposite next time, which backfires. About 20 years ago, I used to work as an office assistant at a small company where we would receive orders from clients and then we would assign the work to one of our freelancers, who were well compensated and respectable professionals. My boss was such a professional herself, and when possible, we would assign that work to her. I accepted the minimum wage job because she told me I could sometimes get tasks assigned as a freelancer with the nice freelancer compensation, that she would personally train me, and that in less than a year, I would most likely be promoted to regular freelancer and make very good money. This sounded like a great career path to my young and naive ears. One of the things she had told me in the very beginning was that when you take over an order, you become like a project manager for that order. You need to make sure that the freelancer would finish the work on time, as the work was usually time sensitive. Additionally, she loved going on long lectures about how she is paying me, minimum wage, for me to use my brain and figure things out when necessary. These lectures were mainly a vehicle for her to stroke her own ego by explaining to her employees how our brains were not as smart as hers. One day, our biggest corporate client had placed a large order that was due on a Monday by noon, and we had assigned the task to my boss to do over the weekend. It was Monday morning, time was ticking, and my boss hadn't arrived at the office. The client had called to see if we were going to provide the work soon, as it was urgent. I tried calling my boss, who didn't pick up her mobile. I called half an hour later and texted her. No answer or reply while noon was fast approaching. So I called her landline at home. Her husband picked up, told me she wasn't home, and I explained very briefly why I was trying to get a hold of her. Less than an hour before noon, my boss called furious that I had been so insistent on getting a hold of her and that I had created a state of stress and emergency at her house. Her home number was for emergencies only, and this wasn't an emergency. It's not professional to call people when they're not at work. She told me she got everything under control and she was now sending the work to the client directly. When she arrived at the office, she gave me a big scolding in person and told me that I do need to hound other freelancers, but not her. It was her business, and she got everything handled. She knew all the clients, and they were clients because of her. She looked me in the eye and told me, "If I take over a task, it's not your task anymore, it's my task. You don't need to bother me with reminders. You just give me the instructions from the client, and I'll handle everything myself. From that point on, your job is done. I never ever miss deadlines. If the client calls, you tell them I'm on it, and you don't call me or text me about it." Fair enough. I apologized for the stress and repeated the new instructions back to her for confirmation. She was very happy with that and confirmed I had understood everything. She once more gave me her favorite lecture about how she is paying me, minimum wage, for me to use my brain, with a lot of condescending examples of how she always uses her brain, unlike us normal workers. I could only nod along, as if her narcissistic rant was actually teaching anybody anything. About a month or so later, another client came in with an order. I accepted it, my boss was available to handle it, so I forwarded everything to her, and I considered my work in regard to that order done as instructed. On the day of the deadline, I was on vacation and was hiking in a remote area with spotty cell coverage. The other office assistant called me and told me the client had called the office to check if the work was ready. I told my colleague that our boss was on it and that we didn't need to worry as our boss was going to handle it, and that my clear instructions were to tell the client our boss was personally on it, the task would be done by the deadline, and explicitly do not call our boss to remind her of the deadline. Then, since I was on vacation, I needed to conserve my battery and everything at the office was handled, I switched off my phone. An approaching deadline that my boss had to meet was explicitly not an emergency. Also, I had recently realized that my boss had knowingly misled me about the career opportunities this job was affording me, so I wasn't going to be on call on my rare day off. While I was hiking without a care in the world, my boss had managed to forget about the deadline. By the time she realized she missed it, the office was closed. My boss had urgently finished the work, but it turned out she didn't know the client so well as she didn't have their contact details. As the order was in the office and my phone was off, she had to go there herself, fetch it, and use the contact details to deliver the work late. This was particularly embarrassing, as my colleague had informed the client our boss was personally doing the work for them. When I came back to work, it was pandemonium. She screamed at me, but I simply pointed out that everything I had done was following her instructions. Why did you do this? You told me to. Why didn't you do that? You told me not to. She was fuming, but she knew I was correct and I had acted exactly as instructed. She also screamed at me for my phone being off, but I said I needed to conserve my battery for emergencies, and this was clearly not an emergency. And I'm not on call while on vacation anyway. Malicious compliance for the win, right? Well, narcissists never accept blame, and she had an idea of how to shift the blame to me after all. But you didn't provide me with the client's contact details with the order assignment. How could I have delivered them the work? It was your fault for not providing me with all the information. I pointed out that she told me she knew all the clients personally, but if she had used her brain, like she is constantly telling us to, she could have easily noticed that the order instructions were on the client's letterhead with all their contact details spelled out, on every single page, bottom and top. Now, that was a huge slap to her fragile ego, and remembering her face in that moment still makes me smile. Needless to say, I was fired. Of course, I didn't mind. Don't you just love happy endings? Jumping down to the comments on this one, we have one from a user called CoderJoe1. It says, "My guess is that you got fired for failing to crawl up her butt to make her feel as special as she knew she was. Learning she wasn't special was grounds for dismissal." OP responded and said, "I see you have met my former boss as well." The interesting thing about this story to me was that the boss said that people should never be called at home, but then they were calling OP while they're on vacation. Rules for thee, but not for me. OP did mention in a comment that they got another job within a week, so good for you, OP, on getting that job, and also good for you on putting that boss into their place, even though you got fired. This story comes to us from The Farzin, how I set up my boss by following his own orders. Recently, my friend told me a story from his life that's a perfect fit for malicious compliance, and I decided to share it from his perspective. This happened about 5 years ago, when I was working at a small tech repair shop. Our boss was this guy named Sergey, a classic control freak who thought being the boss made him smarter than everyone else. He didn't know squat about tech, but loved sticking his nose in and telling us how to do our jobs. Usually, us guys in the shop would just nod and do it our way, but this time, I decided to play by his rules, and here's what came of it. We got an order to fix an old industrial printer, rare beast, bulky, barely any manuals, but I'd worked on a couple before, so I knew right away what was wrong. A clog in one of the feed gears, and a worn out belt. Disassemble, clean, swap a few parts, 5 hours top. I laid out the plan for Sergey, he listened, then launched into his usual, "No, you don't get it, it's an electrical issue, you need to check the board, test everything with a multimeter, I'm the boss here, do it my way." I tried explaining it was mechanical, but he started yelling that I was young, cocky, and clueless, and if I didn't follow his orders, I could go home without pay. Fine, I thought, you're the boss, you know best. I grabbed the multimeter, took the printer apart down to the last screw, and started testing every circuit on the board, exactly like he told me. It was slow, tedious, and totally pointless, because I knew from the start the board wasn't the issue. But I didn't just test it, I documented everything for a report, wrote down readings, snapped pictures of every step, even sketched diagrams so Sergey could see how obedient I was. Took me 2 full days when I could have fixed the thing in half a day. Finally, I stroll up to him with a stack of papers and say, "Sergey, checked it all, board's fine, what now?" He turned red as a beet. The client had already called, furious about the delay. At that point, he figured I'd sabotaged him on purpose, though he dug his own grave, and barked at me to deal with the mechanics since you're so smart. I shrugged, went back, cleaned the gears, swapped the belt, the stuff I'd planned to do all along. A day later, the printer was done. Client was happy, but Sergey looked like he'd been through a week-long spin cycle. After that, he tried bossing me around a couple more times, but I'd just ask, "Like with that printer, your way?" And he shut up real quick. Moral of the story, sometimes it's better to let someone dig their own hole than argue. I knew I was right, but I complied out of spite, and he ended up screwing himself. Still crack up thinking about his face after the report. Jumping down to the comments on this one, there's one from a user called Competitive Score 30. It says, "With this one, I could see him being after billable hours, an unethical business practice to be sure, but I'm sure there are plenty out there that will do what they can to drive up the cost." Another commenter down below called Rolling Steel said, "The greatest flaw with so many in current leadership positions is that they forgot what it was like when they were still following fans, and then stopped listening to the input, ideas, and feedback from those that are following them now. When you stop accepting feedback from your fellow team members who are still out there in the field, in the shop, on those phones, etc., you lose connection and ability to be a critical thinker." I've been in both leadership and support roles and always remind everyone to share their input and accept the suggestions received. As a leader, you'll begin to realize who is offering solid intel and useful input, which can only help make the system and the end result that much better. When you stop listening, you stop learning. In a few of the military stories that we read a few days ago, we came across a sentence that said, "Outrank doesn't mean outknow." And I don't think that's just for military, I think that goes for any working position as well. A boss that outranks their staff definitely doesn't outknow the staff that's doing that same job day in and day out. This story comes to us from Swirling Insanity. Don't like my art? Well, I don't like yours either. I am in college and studying for my extended diploma in art and design. I have a teacher this year who is all about conceptual art and has never drawn a day in her life. To keep this short, I will just list the things she had done before. Told me that my drawings are just copies and are not real art. Told me that anime isn't art and I need to be more realistic. Told my class to use AI art. Told me that my portfolio for university was not enough of me and to remove some of my best work. To put it lightly, this woman gets on my nerves. We were doing an industry-linked project with a local business during our practice project before our final major. She had arranged a visit for the head of the company to come and see our artwork as we were in lesson. She spent 3/4 of an hour looking at 2 people's work in specific. There are 9 of us in that class, and then eventually came over to me and my friends. We all specialize in character creation and concept art, looking at a lot of different animation and cartoons and using those styles. She brought over this woman and said, "These are our character creators. They all really like anime, but we're trying to get them to move away from that and look at some real art." We were shocked that she would just discredit our work in front of the woman who employed us to do work for her business. I am now on our final project. She had told me multiple times on our previous project that you can't just do research on things you like, you need to broaden your research. So I decided to do just that. I made an entire research paper on conceptual art and went into detail discussing an artist's themes and exploring the style of her work and saying how to me it doesn't make sense and that I don't have the same love for it as it seems illogical. I used a lot of points to back up my views and made sure that she couldn't turn it against me. We're also being taken on a trip to a conceptual art gallery that I will be doing the exact same with. She spent the first half of this year discrediting all my hard work and style, so now I will discredit hers. She has seen the research page but didn't even bother to properly read it, but she said how she likes that I've put myself more open to look at different artists. She had seen how I had spoken about it in her brief look over my work and quickly moved on to the next table. completely forgetting to look at the others' work on my table, but they didn't care and they didn't want to talk to her anyway. I hope she knows how much we all don't like her way of teaching. Jumping down to the comment section on this one, we have one from a user called Lord Tyvlor. It says, "Her way of teaching? My brother in Christ, she's a bad teacher. You should complain about her bad-mouthing you in front of the industry, if nothing else. Careers live and die on your reputation, possibly more so for artists, and she does not seem to be starting you off well." Another commenter down below called Evil Prodigy 948 said, "Teacher here, this person should not be teaching you. Get your people together, collect evidence, and report her to your dean or whatever supervisor you have. This is ridiculous behavior from an educator." So OP's taking this course so they can expand their horizons, learn more about their craft, and get better money in their industry. But the teacher here is directly shooting them in the foot by talking them down in front of people from the industry. Yeah, they're completely right. This teacher does not belong in the classroom at all. And OP, there is strength in numbers. If you can get other people together and a bunch of you report this, like you said there were 9 people in that class, if you can get even 4 or 5 of them, then the strength in numbers will make something happen. If you enjoy daily Reddit stories, I encourage you to follow and add us to your favorites on whichever podcasting platform you enjoy the most. And if you're watching and listening on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button and drop a like on the video. It really helps us out. I thank you for watching and listening. I hope you have a wonderful day, and we'll see you tomorrow.